So I will continue sharing the screen and we will go on to introduce our facilitator for today, who is joining us all the way from the US, 4 o'clock in the morning. And we are so grateful for this commitment to Father Bill. So without further ado, let me go on to introduce Father William O'Neill. Father Bill joins us with so much experience, and we are so grateful to have him. He is a resident scholar at the Ignatian Center for Jesuit Education and Director of Migration Ethics at the Markula Center. He previously served as Professor Emeritus of Social Ethics at CSCU's Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley and as visiting professor at Hekima University College in Nairobi. He holds an STL from the Jesuit School of Theology and a PhD from Yale University. His publications include here listed, and there are so many more. This is just the beginning. The Ethics of Our Climate, Hermeneutics and Ethical Theory, published by Georgetown. Reimagining Human Rights, Religion and the Common Good, also published by Georgetown. And Catholic Social Teaching, A User's Guide, Orbis Publications, as well as numerous articles on human rights, reconciliation, restorative justice, refugee and immigration policy, race and incarceration, ecological ethics, and the role of the church in public life. Since 2019, he has been a member of the mission and identity team of the Jesuit Refugee Service, serving in the Kakuma refugee camps in Kenya, Adjumani settlements in Uganda, and the Maban camps in South Sudan. So we are very grateful to have here with us Father Bill O'Neill, and I will now turn over the word for a beautiful prayer.
So, dear friends, it's such a grace to be with you all and a real privilege for me. Our prayer is taken from one of the earliest homilies of our new Pope Leo at St. Peter's Square on Sunday, the 18th of May, just a month ago. And I'll read the prayer for us here as we can quiet our hearts and listen to the word of God. We begin in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Brothers and sisters, I would like that our first great desire be for a united church, a sign of unity and communion, which becomes a leaven for a reconciled world. In this our time, we still see so much discord, too many wounds caused by hatred, violence, prejudice, the fear of difference, and an economic paradigm that exploits the earth's resources and marginalizes the poorest. For our part, we want to be a small leaven of unity, communion, and fraternity within the world. We want to say to the world with humility and joy, look to Christ, come closer to him, welcome his word that enlightens and consoles. Listen to his offer of love and become his one family. In the one Christ, we are one. This is the path to follow together among ourselves, but also with our sister Christian churches, with those who follow other religious paths, with those who are searching for God, with all women and men of goodwill, in order to build a new world where peace reigns. This is the missionary spirit that must animate us, not closing ourselves off in our small groups, nor feeling superior to the world. We are called to offer God's love to everyone in order to achieve that unity which does not cancel out differences, but values the personal history of each person and the social and religious culture of every people. Brothers and sisters, this is the hour for love. The heart of the gospel is the love of God that makes us brothers and sisters. With my predecessor, Leo XIII, we can ask ourselves today, if this criterion were to prevail in the world, would not every conflict cease and peace return from Rerum Novarum. With the light and strength of the Holy Spirit, let us build a church founded on God's love, a sign of unity, a missionary church that opens its arms to the world, proclaims the word, allows itself to be made restless by history, and becomes a leaven of harmony for humanity. Together as one people, as brothers and sisters, let us walk towards God and love one another. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Father Bill, for that beautiful prayer. Definitely gives us so much to think about as we enter into this shared time together. I think we bombard you with a lot of content, a lot of food for thought, but now it is really your opportunity to gather together in an exchange and in a dialogue that we want to foster here today through this webinar. So I want to introduce you a little bit to the agenda. The instructions will be put in the chat as well. We'll go over the methodology. We'll go into the breakout session for the group dialogue, and then we will gather back for the group discussion all together. And I will now give you those instructions as we will shortly move into the breakout rooms. So the first part of the methodology goes to the division into the working groups. What we will ask each of you in the groups to do is to introduce each other. Sorry, if I could ask just everyone to mute themselves. We will go into the division of the working groups, which will roughly take 35 minutes. And we will ask you to introduce yourselves to each other, select one person to represent your group, and then ask each other a little bit of how the material has been working for you, go over the different things that you have been exploring in the Teaching Tuesdays for each week, the Think and Link, the principles, and then answer these two questions. What are the main lessons that you have learned, and what are the main questions you may still have? We ask that each group bring about 1 to 2 questions back to the group dialogue so that we can have a lot of interaction and we can really hear from you. After this session, we will go into the common group for a more wider dialogue, and we'll have 15 minutes of feedback from each group representative. We ask you to keep it succinct and short so that we can really have an enriching 20 minutes of open dialogue and discussion involving all of the participants here. So without further ado, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask now. Otherwise, we will now proceed to divide you into the working groups, which will be done according to language. And of course, the interpreters will also go with you for the French as well as the Spanish.
Can you repeat the 2 questions? They are very easy, but can you repeat it, please?
Yes. So if you see in the chat, we have put the guidelines, but what are the main lessons you have learned so far with the materials seen this time around? And what are the main questions you still have after reviewing everything? What is still simmering in your mind? You will now be receiving on your screen an invitation to join the rooms. So please be sure to go ahead and join a room. Is everyone seeing the screen invitation to go into the rooms? Some are saying no, some are saying yes. If you could just raise your hand if you haven't been assigned. Okay. Audrey, I will be assigning you. Colin, I will be assigning you. Father Paul. Okay. Hugo. Okay. SGR Canada. Okay. Felipe. Okay. Jessica. Okay. Denzil Fernandez. Okay. Okay. Rola. Okay. Okay. Denzil, did you not receive the okay. Rola also received. Jessica, did you not receive the request? Okay. Father Ignatius, I'm going to go ahead and put you into a room. Mhm. Okay. Choosing. And I'm not going to assign you into a room. Okay, some people have not joined, so I'm going to go ahead. Many people have not joined, so I'm going ahead and assigning people. Father Bill, I will leave you out here with us.
That's fine, Danielle. I will just stay online here.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not sure who this is. Lord, okay. Hello. How can
Hello,
I help?
hello,
Hi.
hello.
Yes, can you hear
Ah,
me?
now I can hear because I got
Yes.
disconnected before
Yes.
because of
How can
network.
I help?
Uh, I am not very sure whether I have joined. I joined the
You
group,
are
but
in a breakout room right now.
okay, fine. Thank you.
Of
But
course,
I
no
cannot see
worries.
my colleague. I mean the other people.
Okay. Are you looking at a computer screen?
I'm on my mobile.
Okay, so you should be able to swipe left or right to see other people participating and speak to them.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. sure who this is, but can... Hi, for those just joining us, we are in the breakout rooms. If you could just let me know what language you speak, I can assign you to one of the rooms.
English.
Okay, perfect. I will go ahead and do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Uh, someone under the name of Techno CL6K, what language would you like to join? For 30 minutes. Okay, so that'll be 30 minutes, Father Bill. So I'll go ahead and close my camera and just wait until about 5 minutes before I start reopening the rooms.
Thank you, Daniel. Good.
Hi, how can I help?
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
not hearing the members of my group speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
You're
not
not
hearing.
you're not hearing.
No.
Okay, can everyone unmute themselves and speak? Revocat, can you speak? We do not hear you. If you want to leave the meeting and then re-enter, for the person who just spoke, I'm sorry, the name says Techno, but I'm pretty sure that's not your name. I can put you in another room for now and then add you back into the rooms. I don't know if Ines, can you hear us? Can you speak?
Yes, I can hear you very clear.
Okay, can you hear Ines?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great, great. So I will, Revocat, we can't hear you, but you can leave and then come back and we will add you again to the group, okay? Okay,
Okay.
okay.
Mhm.
Okay, Silvina, don't worry. You can
Daniela,
just
I'm not needed here. Would you like me to go to another group?
CC. I think I'm
Okay,
going
shall I
to
leave?
sí.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Mhm.
Le digo también a Claudia que haga lo mismo porque no la
No, no, no.
necesitan.
Claudia
Mm.
está en el de francés.
Pero dice que nadie, que todos hablan francés y que no necesitan traducción.
Ah, bueno, entonces, pues ella se puede quedar afuera si quieres, porque lo hice por idioma, entonces era solo por si se necesita.
Gracias.
Gracias a ti.
Me voy
Ok,
entonces.
yes. Hello,
So,
how
Azucena,
can
can
I
you?
help?
Who is this? Okay, Daniela, we
Hi.
have Azucena here who
¿Sí?
speaks Spanish. Who
Ok,
can speak Spanish? You
Azucena.
transfer her? Yes, can
Sí,
transfer to another
Azucena.
group?
La voy a
Okay.
mudar al grupo número 6. ¿Está bien?
De acuerdo, muchas gracias.
De
Disculpe.
nada. Si se sale de este cuarto, yo la pongo en el otro.
Gracias, de acuerdo, muchas
Muchísimas.
gracias.
Listo. Claudia,
Yes.
I'm gonna add someone else who speaks French here, so just give me a second, okay?
Okay, okay. And I will translate consecutively. Am I right? Because there are no channels here. Am I right? Okay. No, I mean I will translate consecutively, not
See, if
simultaneously.
anyone,
Yes.
se c'è bisogno, but it's not, if someone
Okay,
needs it,
okay,
but it's not,
okay,
yes.
okay, okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, Revocat, I will put you in the breakout room again, okay? Give me 1 second. Can you hear? You can hear? Okay. We cannot hear you. Mhm. Can you type in the chat? In the chat, you can type. We cannot hear you. Put me in French group, please. Okay, Samsung. Four. So I did I just moved them. Alfred to room 4. Me too no yet, I didn't know yet. Asuntos group, please. Me no. Okay. Okay. So maybe it's the problem of my laptop. Maybe I'm so sorry. Is there any way for you to look at the questions and just type in your answers in the chat? But you can hear us, yes? You can hear us? Revocat, you can hear us, yes. But you just can't speak. Okay, yes. Try to use your phone and come back in and we'll let you in, okay? Okay, thank you. Silvina, I think we're good, so don't worry. We can stay in here and then when they all come back in, you'll be good to go. Some people did not join, so we just leave it here open. Okay, the breakout rooms are closing in 10 seconds.
Great.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. As everyone
Thank
is
you.
joining, I hope you had lively conversations. I hope everyone was able to share. Again, for those that have just been arriving, we do have simultaneous interpretation for the group discussion available. If you go down to the globe, you can choose between French and Spanish. And thank you so much for being here with us. So in this second part, we will hear from each representative of the breakout groups and whoever, I don't like to pick on people, so whoever wants to volunteer, we would like to invite you now. And we would like, please, to keep it short. So just about 2 to 3 minutes if possible, highlighting the questions that you were asking each other in your group. Who would like to go first?
I will do it if you allow me. It's Rolla.
Yes,
So
Rolla, please.
Okay, I was in group 4. We lost a little bit of time to adjust the members and the translation, but generally the issues addressed were about the seeing, judging, and acting, the idea of common good, subsidiarity, and solidarity. And what was mainly raised is the fact that it's a common responsibility. It's a common responsibility, and the issue is mainly about acting, because we can see, we can judge altogether, but we lack some concrete actions, and it's a common responsibility. Was also raised the issue of taking initiative to improve institutions and raising the voice. And here, one main question was stated. It's about the workers' status worldwide when they are migrants, for example, the Filipinos migrants, and they don't have equal salary with the locals, and it affects their dignities. How can we voice to the government? How can we help or improve the economic structures to be able to give those workers their rights?
Thank you, Rola. So what I'm hearing from you is that the example of the kafala system in Lebanon is a part of the bracket that we need to explore in terms of subsidiarity and looking at the principles that we've been exploring in the social teachings.
Yes, also, and the kafala system, and also whenever there are issues related to corruption within the institutions, which affect the equality among migrants, among women and men, for example. So how can we raise our voice? Should we do it alone, or should we do it? Should we engage in a common action?
Thank you so much. Who would like to go next? Go ahead, Father Paul.
Thank you. I think our group was number 2. I didn't write that part down. We looked at, some of the lessons learned, especially from the social structures and the social structures of sin. A number of issues that had come up, but one of the key ones is how to move the Catholic social teaching into the wider culture. Catholic social teaching often reveals how entrenched a different worldview is in the culture, whether that's in the culture of business, of politics, of the structures of power, which has its own way of explaining the world. And so rather than seeking any kind of solidarity, there is often a putting oneself first. Sometimes that's driven by just the particular situation of people. And so, where people are poor and insecure, they may be focused more on survival rather than, a larger sense of the solidarity with others. So it became a question for our group. Well, how can we act? I mean, are we simply powerless in the face of these things? Because it seems every one of the large social institutions, business, politics, communication, tends to push a set of values which is quite different from the Catholic social teaching. And so that this becomes a way of how do we move this into the culture. So I'll just leave it at that. We had a richer discussion, and I think that you'll find more in the notes when we put them up.
Great. Thank you so much, Father Paul. I think it's very important to look at CST principles and how we can apply them in real time, in real life, in the world that we have in front of us today. And I think it definitely goes beyond the question of social structures and culture, but also how we live CST, which Father Bill will be speaking about later. Who would like to go next?
Yeah, I will. Can I?
Yes, of course, please.
Yes, so we are from group number 1, and it took time for us to adjust and so on. But during the discussion, we dwelt on common good, and one of the principles of common good is respect for the dignity of the human person. But in the respective countries, in one country, one of the participants mentioned that often individuals are sacrificed for the common good. Okay, and in another country, there are systems like social systems like the caste system, and society is highly hierarchical and patriarchal. So that is a problem. The other thing is that also common good talks about well-being and development of people. But what happens is there is in development, there is some people who benefit from the development, and some people who pay the price or bear the cost of development, and for all. And most of the people who have to pay the price and bear the cost of development are the poor, the marginalized, the indigenous people, and so on. So these are issues that we discussed. Though we agreed that the social analysis methodology of C-Judge Act is a good methodology to analyze society, but there were questions. The questions questions raised were how the idea of common good is different in different societies. So the Catholic social teaching talks about common good in one way, but other societies like the communism and so on, they have a different idea of common good. So how to reconcile these two different ideas of common good? So this was one area. The other one is it is similar to the question raised by the previous group, that the Catholic social teaching gives an ideal, but the reality is often different, and the way the world is moving around is the values are totally diametrically opposite to what the Catholic social teaching talks about. So how to negotiate this these difference, how to bridge this difference. So these are a couple of questions that were raised. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stencil. I think what I'm hearing is first speaking about the common good and how the inequality and the lack of equity on a national level needs to be addressed, the nuances. And the second is the CST as a basis, but then the application of it in addressing certain realities where maybe the answer is not so clear and applicable. So that is very valuable. Who would like to go next?
Mr. Huku.
Please go ahead.
Yes, For the group 3, we are not we are a little group because some people have connection issue had to disconnect during the conversation. That means we don't have a lot of things, but some point and person talk about, some people talk about the importance of love in key relationships and how that can affect the way we work. Or somebody comment to say the love can be a motivation to continue to work. We talk about the importance of welcoming migrants as brothers and sisters. And somebody thought that is an important work is welcoming back the people that have lived and come back to the country at different moment. The only question then we raise in the group is we see a lot of injustice in the world, discrimination, hatred, etc. Why people can see the others as brother and sister? How to reconcile our faith and the teachings with that situation? Thank you.
First of all, Hugo, thank you so much. I think this we have our work cut out for us, Father Bill. I do think that first of all, thank you so much for joining us, because just like last time, I know the time difference is huge. So big shout out to you for always sticking to coming and joining us all the way from Canada. And the second is, how do we reconcile that injustice with the reality, with the teachings? How do we merge all of that together? And it's very hard. Sometimes we see things in a binary, but actually two opposing things can and are true many, many times. And I'm sure we will get into that dialogue later. Who would like to go next? We have at least 3 groups left. Yes, please. Kim?
My name is Taejin. I'm Korean, but missionary in Cambodia. Actually, it seems we were assigned 5 in our group, but because of the connection, I could talk a little bit with Sister Stella from Philippines. And then she's the first time to join this webinar. And so I'm the only one who shared. She heard my sharing. So what I learned is how our faith, my faith, make it available to the situation of faith and the society. That was a great lesson for me. But and also that's the challenge, because Cambodia, I've been here Cambodia for 25 years as a missionary. Cambodia is a Buddhist country by constitution. So Catholic is minority, less than 1%. Only 25,000 Catholic whole country. So our presence is very limited, but how we can live out Christian value in this Buddhist country, that's we can practice our own faith in our given situation, but how we can make connection to the society in general, social structure. That was the first challenge. And second is as many of us, the country, same situation, I cannot trust any social analysis, because all the analysis, I can say, well, not all fake, but much exaggerated and too much focused on bright side of the society, doesn't reflect much the reality. My 25 years of lived experience doesn't match to the present analysis, like World Bank, WHO, UNICEF, doesn't reflect much. So without that quite trustworthy social analysis, how we can build hope or making plan for the future? I think that's my question. Is there any other way to see the sign of the time in our country? Maybe I need some collective wisdom from other missionaries all over the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Taejing. First of all, thank you for your service. Thank you for the mission you carry. It is not easy. I'm sure you wake up every day and you have to recommit to this. And I believe that being a prophetic voice is one of the biggest calls of our time. We heard it from Pope Francis, who was definitely a prophetic voice. We hear it now from Pope Leo, addressing very necessary and timely things. So I hope that the group has answers for you regarding this first challenge you mentioned, of how to live that faith in a minority and coexistence in the interfaith, especially in the context of Cambodia. And then also, how can we acknowledge the fault of the structures that exist without glamorizing them, but also working with what exists and acknowledging we can't just start from scratch tomorrow, and we have to be able to coincide and intersect. Sister Harriet, please.
Yes, Daniela. Good afternoon to you. I'm very grateful for having joined this platform because it is my first time. I was supposed to join group 6, but because of my network problem, I remained hanging. I was there, I couldn't reach the group. But personally, as you had given us the questions, I was thinking about them. And according to what the members have shared, what they have experienced from their different groups, I'm also asking, how can we incorporate the Catholic social teaching in our day-to-day lives? That is my concern of today. I'll be very grateful.
Thank you, Sister Harriet, and I'm so sorry for the connection, but I think it's one of the best and most relevant questions. Over to you, Revocat. We cannot hear you. Will you be able to write it in the chat? Anyone also from the Spanish groups, the French groups? We can also have your feedback. We have someone here in the chat, Malone, who joins us from Zimbabwe, a climate and mobility migration advocate, and also a migrant rights and refugee rights defender and a Catholic youth. He has discovered that we still have a long way to go for the society to have equal treatment, especially for international migrants and refugees, asylum seekers. And he believes the church plays a big role, especially abiding with CST. And he has lived experience within various African countries. So we hope to hear him also. Revocat, can you mute the computer, and then now you can unmute from your phone, and then I believe you will be able to speak.
Now you can hear me.
There's a bit of a echo.
Thank you very much for welcoming me in this platform. Can you hear me now? Yes, this is the second time being in this platform. We are discussing about the Catholic social teaching, and I'm grateful for the lesson you have shared, where you have learned more about the marginalized, the principle of common good. Now, personally, I would like to introduce myself. I'm called Revocat Nesaba from Burundi. Currently, I am living in Kenya, Nairobi. Yes, this country, as I can see, the principle of common good, because we have many people or many children in the street. So we see how people, they have a good heart, how they share what they have. So for me, I can say I have a great experience whereby I meet people of goodwill. I can see how they help each other because of the principle of common good and subsidiarity. So as a last lesson, we are requesting that maybe because we have now a new Pope Leo the 14th, he's going to introduce that maybe the priest can share the teaching of Catholic social teaching, including the homily and the reflection, because this is a great concern to the people of goodwill, because some people we are there and we don't understand what is common good, because you can see in the country where people look for themselves but not for the common good. This we see whereby some people, when they are campaigning for the authority, they seek vote for the people for a good time, but when they reach there, they concentrate to themselves. So we are requesting, as my humble request, that maybe you can pass this question to the Catholic teaching headquarters to see if they can introduce. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Revoca. Thank you so much. Charity, over to you.
Yes.
This is Group 8. We had chosen Yun Hua to present on our behalf, but I can see that she has dropped off.
Oh, no, I'm here.
Okay, great. You can go on, Yun Hua.
Thank you, Charity. In group number 8, we have 3 ladies. We shared our individual charity jobs and our how we do the charity job in our community. The question is how we put this Catholic teaching more practical or more innovative or more something newer in our community. Because just like we have already discussed, we have from different countries, we have different cultural backgrounds. So sometimes we really need some innovation idea to apply the Catholic teaching in our daily life. So this is the questions from team number 8. And the lessons from team number 8 is, as we already heard, the common good things. Common good is very difficult, and it is sometimes it's very hard to find a mutual beneficial way to apply it, and especially in our controversial world. So like previous teams said, the common good is, the idea is good, but how we apply in our daily life. So this is team number 8 sharing. Thank you for so much.
Thank you, Charity. Thank you, Ivy, for that feedback. I think, again, very relevant. What we're hearing here is a lot of food for thought. And so now, if no one else wants to share anything else, I believe we covered most of the groups. I will now turn it over to Father Bill. We've been taking some notes. I've been seeing him diligently writing everything. So we will go ahead. But right before, Peter just shared in the group chat, how can the Catholic social teaching help Catholics or its practitioners to navigate the complexities of this world, such as political compromises, power dynamics, competing interests, and the scourge of corruption, which I believe is a reoccurring question that keeps popping up. So right on ahead, over to you, Father Bill. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much. I would just begin with a word of gratitude for the wonderful experience that you bring. I've often thought that Catholic social teaching is not so much a set of disembodied principles. It's more like the grammar of a language that you already speak. And sometimes we need to step back when you're learning a new language to look at the rules of the grammar. But they hang together. It's a wisdom and a way of life. And so your rich experience that you express individually, but also collectively, is always where we begin. We say, see, judge, act. But those aren't separate moments. They're a circle, or better, a spiral. It begins with our experience, our personal and collective, but always comes back to it, enriches. That the teaching church is always a learning church. That's how Catholic social teaching began, its origin, and the struggle of the workers at the end of the 19th century. And Pope Leo has drawn from that well of new things. And so again, I would say trust the richness of your own experience, because you are already seeing, you are acting, and you are judging. So think of Catholic social teaching as a grammar of a language you already speak. And how then can we speak that prophetically? That, I think, is the critical question. And I'll just say one word and then open it up to the further clarifications that Daniela has. But I found it helpful that we think of our Catholic social teaching as Catholic in the uppercase, that we are Catholics as Pope Leo reminds us, who bear a distinctive tradition, ultimately rooted in the scriptures of God's great biblical imperatives of justice, of tzedakah, mercy, compassion. These are at the very heart of the gospel. Care for the widow, the orphan, the stranger. Fred had mentioned that in our last session. But these biblical imperatives are translated into, as I say, the grammar of our Catholic social teaching. So it's Catholic in the big C sense, that we are a church that bears this teaching. But several of you had mentioned, how do we mediate this teaching? How do we speak, as Jesus says at his inaugural discourse, the gospel that be heard today, in our hearing, in our today? It's also Catholic in the small c sense, that in the Greek word, it means universal. We use the modern language in many ways, although it goes back for centuries, but of dignity, of human rights, to fill out and flesh the teaching. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a global declaration, speaks of our common faith in dignity, in human rights. And that's a faith that is nourished by our own particular traditions. But we are able, in other words, to be both Catholic in the uppercase sense, but translate those great biblical imperatives into a common language, one that is at the heart of political legitimacy today. When we look at the international conventions, the covenants, and the Universal Declaration of Rights itself. So you see, for instance, the encyclical letters of the Pope speaking to those who share our faith and to those who are of different faiths, that we can have a common language, a common grammar. So I'll just say that as a beginning, and Danielle, to see for further questions or summaries that of the questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Father Bill. I think we can start from the very top. Rula kicked us off with some a really poignant question, which is when we look at, for example, the question of worker status worldwide, the corruption, the inequality of these systems, how can we appropriately use these teachings to address such? How can we see, judge, and act effectively, not just performatively?
A great, wonderful question. And in a very important way, then it brings us back to the very first modern social encyclical, 1891 Rerum Novarum, and that's Leo XIII. And Pope Leo has mentioned explicitly that is why he chose the name, because it is of new things, but new things that hark back really to the heart of the Church's teaching. From the very beginning, the concern for justice is covenant fidelity. You were a people enslaved, whose labor was exploited. And that memory, that saving memory, we remember in the Eucharist, the anamnesis of memory. This is what formed the people, is the covenant fidelity, the justice that ultimately has its roots in God's redeeming love. That we must be faithful to that covenant. And how are we faithful? The measure is always the well-being of those who are least. The widow, the orphan, the stranger, and the stranger is the migrant, is the refugee, the alien among us. How are those who are least consigned to the margins brought to the center through a genuine hospitality that is always just? So Catholic teaching from the very beginning is concerned not merely with the minimum wage, but with a living wage. In other words, the wage that a person receives for labor must be sufficient to live a life of true dignity. That is what is said. And of course, that's going to vary from time to time and country to country, in a rural society, agricultural or urban. But always key is the understanding that it is a living wage, one that can be enough for a person to express his or her dignity. And one of the questions that a number of you are, how do we talk about that? How do we mediate? How do we live this tradition? And I'll give you an example. Some years ago, I was asked to speak on these very questions of employment, labor, and corruption for a group of very poor youth in Kenya. It was our program, Hakimani, and they asked me, can you speak of the rights of a child? Where these children were entering the labor market, 17 or 18. Many of them, especially the young women, had experienced discrimination because of their ethnic status or gender. And it's so abstract. If you begin with the language of dignity, everyone is silent and listening. So we began the conversations not with the abstract principle of dignity, but with the experience of not having one's dignity recognized. In other words, to ask them, when did you experience the lack of respect? When were you not respected? And then it opened the conversation to be able to talk about, I'm applying for a job and I was refused because of my name or because of my gender and my poverty. So in other words, sometimes we learn about justice by beginning with the experience of injustice that we feel in the bone and marrow of our lives, when we have been treated, when those we love have been denied the fundamental rights that are necessary for a life with dignity. So I think how we mediate the tradition is sometimes always beginning with people's experience. When has your dignity, when has your equal, inalienable worth not been recognized? And then people have a voice, they can tell their stories. And that's so critical. That's where we have to begin, is with that sense of the inalienable, the permanent dignity, that each person is precious in the eyes of God. And we use a Christian language for that, but that's a language that Buddhists and Muslims, Marxists, and all have used today, that each of us has inalienable worth. That's part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's at the heart of modern political legitimacy, even though so often what we see is not dignity, but it's negation. It's the suffering and beauty of life that is negated because of our social policies and structures. So it's a long answer to your question, but I think the dignity of labor is a recognition. This is how we express our lives, how we care for our families. And as we heard last week from Fred Kammer, looking at John Paul especially, but it's a constant thread throughout the tradition that work is not a punishment. It is the way we express our human agency, our care for one another. It's our sharing in the very creativity of God. But so often work is debased, is discriminating, it leaves people, as I say, at the very margins of society, suffering unjust labor conditions. All of this means that we need to have a living wage and conditions of work that accord with that fundamental worth and dignity, the equal dignity that we bear. So I hope that's at least the beginnings of an answer to your question.
Thank you so much, Father Bill. I think, though, responding to some of the questions of how we bear witness to the reality today and address that, we also need to be able to address the gap between servitude and a state of slavery, of modern slavery, and what is actually can be defined as work that does not strip the person of the dignity and gives them their right to develop their full potential. So integral human development at its core. So if a person desires to be something, but because of the social structures in their context, how can we also accompany them, serve them, be the salt, if you will, to be able to give them the opportunity to also have in that share without being exploited, without their dignity being not even recognized to begin with, such as is the question a little bit about the kafala system. It's a social structure that exists. And so, how, I guess, the bridging of that gap in different realities. We heard from also Cambodia, different places in the world where we know this is happening, even the US in the current political landscape. How can we bridge that gap?
Thank you so much. And it's a way of thinking, I think, too, Daniela and my friends, how these basic principles of Catholic social teaching hang together. They're a coherent grammar. So we don't speak a grammar, we speak grammatically. We speak a prophetic word that is a way of drawing upon all of these principles. And one I want to simply return to is that when we say to see, judge, act, the seeing is always from the perspective of those on the margins. because the heart of Catholic teaching, as we've said before, is that understanding, and I think here of the refugee camps where I was, of each child as infinitely precious, even though we see their bodies covered with dust from the journey, the suffering. We see dignity under the sign of its negation. And yet, it's always where we begin. And I think it's so critical that we recognize that dignity binds us in solidarity. In the African traditional wisdom, Desmond Tutu, for instance, or Julius Nyerere would speak of Ubuntu, that we begin with a we. We are created in the image of God. So dignity must always be understood in terms of solidarity. And the critical question, do you see, is if we believe in equal dignity and therefore equal human rights, whose equal rights are unequally threatened or denied. In other words, the option for the poor, for the laborer, those who live lives in social degradation or deprivation. That is where we begin. It's the seeing that leads to judgment and action, that hermeneutical circle or spiral. But the key is, if we believe in equal dignity, equal rights, the central question is whose equal dignity, whose equal rights are unequally denied or threatened. The option for the poor is not an afterthought. It's the place from where we begin. It's how we see the world from the perspective, from the reality of those who have been consigned to the margins. And that means listening to their stories, to their understanding of what it means for them to live a life with dignity and solidarity. And just as a footnote, lest I forget, that the question that some of you raised about the common good, and recognize how that can become distorted. So often we can speak of a common good that subordinates individuals to it, so that today the dominant political systems sometimes will say, well, we have dignity without solidarity. We have the individual who claims simply to be left alone to carry on with my life. And then we have emphasis on solidarity that can subordinate the individual, for instance, in patriarchy or ethnic discrimination. Catholic teaching from the beginning says no. Dignity binds us in solidarity. Solidarity is expressed in terms of equal human rights. And that's critical. The common good today in Catholic teaching, especially since Pacem in Terris, John the 23rd tells us, will be realized when the equal dignity and equal rights of every person are structurally guaranteed. And that means we have duties, not just of forbearance, but duties of performance. We have an obligation in solidarity to respond in justice to those who are least in. Who are the widow, the orphan, the stranger today? What are their stories? That is the seeing that leads to judgment and action. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Bill. Going back a little bit to some of the feedback we got, combining group 3 who goes sharing also with Teijin. So the interfaith aspect of reconciling with the injustices we bear witness to, but also the reconciliation we are called to embark on in different interfaith, political, social structure intersections. How do we really reconcile the two? And how can we forge a way forward and push and, I guess, harvest and embody the hope that is needed?
Again, wonderful questions. The reconciliation can sometimes be cheap grace. You know, if we speak too quickly of being reconciled without justice. And the Catholic understanding, both in the big C and the small c sense, reconcile. When Jesus says in Matthew 5:24, first be reconciled, this is the exercise of justice, of redeeming the solidarity that we bear in our baptism, but simply by virtue of our common humanity. There is no true social reconciliation that is not grounded on God's work of justice. And that is the case. Tzedakah, justice, shalom, justice and peace, Lucas, in the Psalms. Those always are notions that imply one another. There can be no true reconciliation that is not at the same time a reconciliation that respects and recognizes the human rights of those who are least among us. And there is no true peace then that is not founded on justice, and no justice that does not eventually lead to that deeper solidarity of shalom, of peace. And reconciliation, I think, entails at least three elements, you could say. First, we have to be able to recognize the injustice that has led to the breaches, the alienation. We have to name evil for what it is. Politically motivated rape in so much of our world cannot be redescribed as something else. Genocide is genocide. Apartheid, the white supremacy in my country cannot be redescribed as something else. It cannot be dismissed. In other words, we have to have a profound sense of hearing the stories of those who have been consigned to the margins. Then we need to accompany the victim. We need to identify those who are victimized. We need to accompany the victim that they can be restored to the blessings of community. And we need to address the sources, the causes of victimization. Here is the questions of structural injustice, the structures of sin that Father Paul had mentioned. All of these together are involved in any process of social reconciliation, of naming the victim, addressing causes of victimization, of accompanying victims. And these occur at the political level, at the ethical level, and ultimately the religious level. Forgiveness is a part of this, but forgiveness cannot be cheap grace. It rests on a victim's right to forgive. That is her dignity, her agency, and it must be freely given. The perpetrators of this world have no right to forgiveness. That is the gift of the victim, of those who have suffered, and we see that. But that's the exercise of Christian love that is always itself based on the foundations of justice. So I hope that sense of reconciliation can never simply be cheap grace. It really is an ongoing struggle to achieve the fundaments of social justice.
Thank you, Father Bill. I think adding on to that, we also had Tejing who brought up how do we reconcile the reality of the social structures, their corruption, the lack of trust, public trust towards some of these structures, such as the UN, such as the World Bank, what they stand for versus what actually happens in reality, and how can we answer to that given these principles, given that responsibility, and then also making it an internal process. How that reconciliation also must begin from within. Can we reconcile? Many of us live dual identities, dual realities. Missionary work is very based on that as well. And I think the importance of love that Hugo also mentioned. What are the roles of those key elements of Catholic social teaching that we can really embed in that? And then I will then ask you about the innovative practices. So a lot of, the principles, but how do we actually act towards that? How do we innovate and how do we make them practical? Like we were hearing before from Ivy. Thank you.
Yes, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we always must begin with the reality of experience. And so often I think this is a matter of listening. It was one of the great African theologians, Zuku, says we need a church with large ears. We need to be able to hear what Pope Francis says is the cry of the poor. And we cannot hear that unless it also in some sense becomes our cry. That means the solidarity that is grounded in accompaniment, I think, is absolutely critical. Our aim is not to become the voice of the poor. It is to be media through which that voice is heard. It's critical today, I think, that we become what in the 1930s theologians like Bonhoeffer says, what does it mean to become a confessing church? In a world which its confession is avarice, domination, even the betrayal of the fundamental tenets of Christianity. There must be a place for prophecy. Liberation theologians say this is the work of denunciation and of annunciation. And this is a prophetic word, I think, that comes out of accompanying the widow, the orphan, the stranger, those in our midst today, the Anoim, those who have suffered injustice. It is to allow their voice to be heard, the cry of the poor, which is, as Francis reminds us, is also today the cry of our earth. What we see so often is betrayal of principles, and yet that very betrayal gives us an entree. I think we see this in the prophetic ministry of Francis, and we see it already in the words of Pope Leo, that the foundation of the modern political order which is so often systemically betrayed, is what the Universal Declaration called our faith in equal dignity and human rights. The various covenants that specify the rights of women, the rights of children, the rights of indigenous. This is the law that we have that is our international, the basis of international legitimacy. So we can appeal to that and look at the hypocrisy of so much of our leadership. Just recently, some of you from Kenya, this is what you have the youth. They are using the very language of legitimacy. Protect our rights as citizens. This is what they're using. They're using the rights that they have against those who deny those rights. And I think this is what we need to have, is the power of prophetic denunciation that can lead to annunciation. But we have to begin by naming the victim, by naming those who have suffered, and recognize the injustice of that suffering. This requires a prophetic church. It requires a church that is a confessing church, that breaks from the hypocrisy of so much Christianity, what Francis calls the globalization of indifference. At Lampedusa, where he saw bodies of African migrants come, he asked at the beginning of his papacy a question that remains: have we lost the ability to weep? To see these sisters and brothers? That's where we have to begin, a lived solidarity. And out of that comes the power of prophetic denunciation. And we can use the social media, for instance, the way that Francis did, the way that Leo did. I mentioned to you as a gesture of reconciliation, when Francis, the head of the Anglican Church, Welby, and the head of the Scottish Presbyterian Church joined together after 500 years of division to plead for peace in DRC and in South Sudan. This was an exercise of prophecy, but it was a public exercise that showed we can be reconciled and therefore become instruments of reconciliation. And the language they used was translating the great biblical imperatives of justice, tzedakah, of shalom, of peace. Translating that language into the language of political legitimacy, holding these leaders accountable to what we say is our common faith in dignity and human rights. We begin, I think, by recognizing the hypocrisy, the corruption of so much leadership, but we have to name it as such. And the danger today, in many ways, especially with the role, and Pope Leo has mentioned this, is not only that we believe what is false, but that we cease to believe what is true. There's so much deep faking, and some of you have mentioned that we lose the ability to read the social reality. And this is where we have to begin, grounded in the truth of solidarity, in the suffering of our people. We begin with their testimony, because that's where the gospel will be heard. So I hope that's helpful a bit. And again, it's looking to those experiences, both at a personal but a practical level. You think of the work of peace for San Egidio over the years, the work in the US of the Catholic worker community, where Dorothy Day, quoting Dostoevsky, says, yes, love in practice is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams, but we are called to love and practice. And just a final word, I think of Dorothy Day, who's been deeply influential for me. You know, she said once, or rather, one of her friends said to me once, Bill, he says, we who are privileged can never afford the luxury of despair. Never afford the luxury of despair. We have to learn our hope from those mothers, for instance, I saw in South Sudan, who daily are caring for their children with disability, who have not abandoned their children and have not abandoned their hope. And that's, I think, to be in solidarity with them, to learn from them as equals, to see their prophetic witness is what gives us voice to be able to speak our own prophetic witness.
Thank you so much, Father Bill. And right before I turn it over to Francis, who has his hand raised, I want to go back to some of the input that was coming in from the chat. Rula said, should we be whistleblowers on our own or join a community and dilute our experience for the sake of a more powerful collective voice? And then Alfred also joined in to say, can the Catholic Church's social teaching, which calls for social injustices in the world to be combated in order to guarantee human dignity, promote a common action that does not itself carry the seeds of inequality? Over to you.
Yeah, both, again, excellent questions. And maybe to begin with the latter first, for the Church to be a prophetic witness, to equal dignity, equal human rights. Key human right is that of effective participation that correlates with subsidiarity, that we must be just ourselves and we must be perceived as just. And that is absolutely critical. And I think it's a constant sense of what I would say that the virtues of prophetic humility. If we are going to be prophetic, we must be humble enough to recognize that we too are earthen vessels. But it is vessels that ultimately hold the powerful word of God that must be spoken. So yes, the church must itself become a beacon of the equality, especially for women, minority, indigenous, for those whose voices it seeks to mediate. And with respect to a personal collective action, again, the See Judge Act always brings us back to the nitty-gritty of experience. There's some places, and tragically many in our world, and increasingly in my own country, where if you speak out individually, you will be crushed. So there's a power in being able to speak collectively with the impetus and institutional support of the church itself. One of our bishops years ago was speaking against nuclear disarmament. When people looked at him as prophetic, Bishop Hunthausen, and he says, no, the real prophecy is the people. You have summoned me to become a prophet. But he had institutional protections in place for those who might lose their jobs because they spoke out against the constant impetus to increase the nuclear armament. So we have to be wise as serpents, innocent as doves, and not the other way around. In other words, we have to ask, what are the costs of speaking? Speaking itself is not always effective. We have to ask, how will it bear fruit? When to speak publicly and how collectively? How can we it's not necessarily, I think, diluting a prophetic message. It's how our experience can be conjoined with others to be able to speak effectively. So the reality of nonviolent resistance that we see in many parts of our world has been so effective because it is shaming people into a recognition of our common dignity. Who recognize that you are, what you are doing is to your own sisters, your own brothers. So I think effective nonviolent strategies, speaking a prophetic word, but always wisely, always weighing the consequences. In other words, as you said, I think, Daniela, it's not enough just to feel noble, a performative exercise of denunciation. We are seeking fundamental structural change. That is what we've devoted our lives to. And we do that incrementally, but I say never losing that hope, which is really at the heart of our own prophetic call. And each of us summoned to that. And I just add, just maybe as a footnote, it's so important when we look at the common good, as difficult as that notion is, to see it's grounded in the equal rights of all. And as Gustavo Gutierrez reminds us, that means it's grounded in the rights of the poor. That those rights derive, if I respect you, Daniela, as a moral agent, I must respect the conditions of your exercising agency. Enough to eat, potable water, freedom from abuse, sexual abuse, but especially as so many women have suffered. The human rights hang together as do the duties, and the duties are to protect and to provide the structures that will allow each person to live and collectively to live together with dignity. That is, I say, the grammar of our rights. It's the grammar of denunciation and annunciation of a prophetic ministry.
Thank you so much, Father Bill. I believe, Francis, you had your hand up. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the lucid talk. I'm joining you from Nairobi, Kenya. And some of the things that you have just mentioned, we have experienced them, especially with these Gen Z demonstrations. There's just, before this talk began, we are just talking at table, and one of the people who performs a very special task is a Gen Z, is young. He was coming to administer critical care to one of the fathers that is in where I am staying currently, and he was arrested by the Kenyan police and asked for identity and was even handcuffed. So he had to call and prove that he's going to work. But all I can say, I'm an ex-Jesuit, and I've seen that charity has to start at home. Because our bishops here, some of them are not servants, but they are rulers. So it's very hard to point out at the politicians, while we ourselves within our Catholic Church and cycles, we live large like kings and we are not servants. Because I've traveled like 400 kilometers to look for a critical signature recommendation for a course that I'm going to do in Rome, a licentiate in safeguarding. And you see, being treated like just, I have to beg. I've not yet even gotten the signature. My own bishop, Archbishop, I took the letters even for the scholarships for aid for the church in need. And he saw that this group disappointed him before, and he said he cannot sign. So he's not recommending me for that. And it is me. So it is my responsibility that time. It is my scholarship. And he says because they have disappointed him before, he will not sign. So I have to come to Nairobi and look for bishops. Yesterday I was up by 4 a.m. and go to offices by 6 in the morning. So I find that charity begins at home. And even the politicians know it in Kenya. Yes. They will just point. Your bishops live large. They know who owns what. They know that we are not living the way we are supposed to live. So we cannot speak out. That is the biggest challenge that we have. And like what you have just said, I think there's critical need for us to have these talks and more of inform, to teach the minds and the hearts really about Catholic social teachings and the teachings of Jesus Christ, to be more centered on the person of Jesus Christ. I think that is lacking, and many of us are very comfortable because we fear the consequences. Yeah, people disappear. If you speak, be prepared for consequences. And I'm so much impressed by the brothers in India, the Jesuits there, and even the Jesuits in the US are very vocal, and they have structures in place. I think if we can have that in Africa, and in most part in places like Congo, where the people are extracting minerals and what have you, if the minds of the masses and the people can be informed, it can really help. And we need to have such talks, not only talk the talk, but walk the talk by inculcating some of these values in preparing structures that we can use to engage a wider audience. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. That was eloquent. And I was in Nairobi not that long ago, seeing the beginnings of the Gen Z protests. They're using the language of equal rights. It's the first time, isn't it, that you don't have, for instance, the administration playing on ethnic differences, but speaking about our common humanity and the rights of each child to a right to education. And it's so important to see basic human rights hang together. You cannot have true freedom if you are hungry, if your stomach is empty, if you don't have potable water. But the best way defending the rights to adequate nutrition is through the exercise of liberty. And these young people are exercising that liberty. And I think the church was late coming to see it, but some of the bishops have recognized that. Here is a prophetic voice. And if the church can use its institutional authority to support that, then you have a powerful platform. That's what Francis has, why he had gone to South Sudan and to DRC. I think when he had come to Central African Republic, it's not that that's going to change the politicians, but it changes the social reality. It holds a mirror to the reality of suffering and injustice. And as I say, we cannot have social reconciliation unless we name the evil that is done, that has to be remedied. And I would say, too, if we think of Jesus' own prophetic mission, as you mentioned, Francis, when he begins in Luke's gospel, quoting from the prophet Isaiah, that the Spirit is given me today in the very life and ministry of Jesus to speak a word of freedom to the oppressed, liberty to those enslaved, sight to the blind, a year of Jubilee, which is a year of restoration and justice. And then he says, gives the scroll to the synagogue attendant and says, "Today these words are fulfilled in your hearing." That today in the Greek is our today. It's not the past. And that's what Catholic social teaching is. How does that gospel proclamation, which defines who we are as Christians, live today in our hearing? And what happened immediately? They were ready to throw Jesus off the cliff, because the prophetic message that of denunciation and annunciation will brook opposition. And we have to know that love is crucified. And we are called to be in solidarity with the crucified people. And we have to be willing to accept that cost, but to do it wisely. But it is a prophetic word is a hard grace. It is love in practice, not love in dreams. So you're absolutely right. But the church, say in Kenya, has a critical institutional role to play. It can question the government's legitimacy, and it can confer legitimacy on the Gen Z. It can plead for nonviolent resistance to provide a forum for leadership, which is sometimes lacking among the young people themselves. So thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you so much to both. I just want to highlight a couple of things that were shared in the chat before turning it over to Malone with his hand raised. Ignatius shares the social teachings of the church that are relevant to us in Indonesia are Laudato Si and the Querida Amazonia. And what Querida Amazonia teaches is very appropriate for seeing how the church, which during the colonial era received facilities from the colonial government, must deal with the tribes whose land was taken by the colonial government. The church must respect the indigenous people. Querida Amazonia provides extraordinary inspiration. The central issue is that within the Catholic Church, there is a tension between wanting to base its actions on the rights of indigenous peoples and the opposing laws of the state, which are a continuation of colonial laws, and to which Rola also added, is it possible to propose innovative approaches leading on to what Ivy was mentioning? And before we proceed on that, I just want to add a little piece, if I may. Not only seeing the journey of Jesus to Calvary, as in the journey of our brothers and sisters who journey with hope and in hope every single day when they cross the Mediterranean Ocean to look for a better life, when they cross the Sahara Desert, women who are trafficked and raped every 12 minutes in the Democratic Republic of Congo, women in Sudan and South Sudan, all over the world, in Haiti, in Colombia, and many parts of the Darien, going up to Calvary. A journey that never ends. Do we see the face of the other? Is it hope lived, embodied, expressed? Or is it just something we think of as distance to ourselves? So it's also the relativity of acknowledging one's own privilege and one's own access to having a voice, and how we can, in that proximity, provide the practice and the embodiment of that hope that Jesus was and is on his way to Calvary as his mother agonizes, watching his son, her only son at that point, being completely dehumanized, and receives his body at the foot of the cross. And if that is not a testament of hope lived, embodied, specifically by women, this is a very much a call to action, and one of the practical ways in which we can bear witness, which comes at a price. But the price can also be interpreted as eternal life according to the Catholic social teaching. So over to you, Malone.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm so excited to be part of these conversations that are very fruitful. As a Catholic youth from Zimbabwe, I'm deeply connected with my background as a young climate activist from Zimbabwe. I also work with the Catholic Church in terms of Laudato Si. I've been listening deeply in what we call from St. Ignatius of Loyola, self-introspection, self-introspective, see God in all things that we do. But I believe as the Catholic Church, probably coming from the idea of Catholic social teachings. Of course, people have been preaching and talking about Catholic social teaching, and people have been talking about Catholic social teachings in various ways from various presenters. And I want to commend probably India from speakers about issues of Catholic social teachings in terms of, I advocating for the rights of migrants, rights of refugees. But I believe in Africa, much has been done, maybe because of probably finance to spearhead these programs, cascade these programs to community level. And the issue of language, which I think is also coming from the idea of finance, because some of the communities, they have their own local languages. Remember that we have indigenous communities, indigenous people. They understand much these concepts coming from their own language, local languages. Let me say from Zimbabwe, English is our universal language at the national level. In Zambia, English is also a universal language. Going to South Africa, but they've got their own localized languages, indigenous languages, which I think should also be considered when you are talking about issues of probably migration rights, migration law. I'm also an Aslam seeker advocate. IDP is what we call internally displaced people advocate, and migrants advocate. I've moved from various countries under the IOM as a volunteer in Southern Africa, in East Africa. I have discovered that the church is doing something which is probably commendable, but it's not enough. Let me just go back to 2015 in May, 2015 May, when the late Pope Francis was talking, when he opened about the issue of Laudato Si in his book, Encyclical of Pope Francis. Up to now, from Zimbabwe, speaking from the experience, the clergy hasn't done enough to support the idea of Laudato Si. They can here and there. If you go to the parishes, various dioceses, we've seen people from America, Jesuits from America, via social media, advocating for these programs, even migration programs under the Jesuit Society of Jesus in various countries, Jesuit UK, Jesuit Canada, Jesuit America. They've been advocating for this. But I've been asking myself a question: where is Africa? What are we doing in protecting these migrants? Remember that people from Africa, in terms of the displacement matrix coming from the IOM Statistical Center and other centers probably from Asia, we are one of the most moving continents in terms of displacement from Africa and Asia. But what are we doing coming from the issue of Catholic social teachings for the common good? There's no information from our bishops, specifically speaking from the bishops. I want also to concur with my previous speaker, but in Zimbabwe, in terms of probably protecting the rights of young people and so on during these elections and so on and so on and so on, political things, they've been rising up. We've done what we call the march is not ended, where the ZCPC, Zimbabwe Catholic Bishop Conference, have been advocating for social equality, for social justice, speaking from the idea of Catholic social teachings, which is enough. But I think the another thing is that speaking from social media cannot bring us results only. We have to act. How can we act? We are supposed to act, probably doing some practical things. As of now, people have been talking about pilgrims of hope, which is very commendable. As of course, people have been gathering and doing these things. But as an advocate for migration, I'm concerned. Since 2015 up to now, nothing much has been done in the continent of Africa in advocating for the migrants coming from the church perspective. Which I think there's a big hole, there's a big gap, which I think we should also need to work, specifically coming from the idea of the Jesuits in America, in Canada, in Australia, and other continents, to make sure that we close the gap, working closely with the Jesuits in Africa, the various provinces, so that we can probably make some commendable improvements in terms of making sure that we advocate for the rights of the migrants, asylum seekers, IDPs, and so on, speaking from the idea of Catholic social teachings, where I think that nothing much has been done again for people within the Catholic sect before going outside, for people to understand what is a Catholic social teaching. Do we understand the pillars of Catholic social teachings, specifically from the youth? Because we are the now of the church, and we are the president of the church. Much hasn't been done to cascade this idea. So I think we should try to also do some commendable things, some recommendations, proffer some solutions, so that we can try to close this gap, specifically coming from African perspective and other continents like Asia, where I think people migrate a lot going to overseas in countries like Europe and in America. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those are wonderful questions. I would just say very briefly, in my own life, one of the great influences has been African religious wisdom. I lived in Tanzania as a young Jesuit under Nyerere Ujamaa regime. that human rights are not the individual rights of sovereign selves that we think of in the West. In Catholic social teaching, they're the rights of a we, dignity in solidarity, and that always means the rights of the poor. This is something Nyerere understood, I believe. It's something that Desmond Tutu understood when he grounded the language of human rights in Ubuntu, a sense of our common humanity. There's much that the West can learn from African wisdom. The first right of a refugee is not to become one. That is a right to their homeland, and we have to begin there with structural justice. Enunciation, the structures of sin, a denunciation and annunciation of what structures of grace, what can be accomplished. It's so critical, as you say, we join collectively, but always with an ear to those who are consigned to the margins. I really want to underscore Daniela's beautiful, eloquent words that we live in a deeply wounded world. The heritage of colonialism, of neocolonialism, is with us in the cry of the earth. And responsibility has to be assigned in light of that. That if there is to be a global we have to recognize each of us bears distinct responsibility within the scope of our own agency and our own place in this history. And finally, just to return to the beautiful words of Daniela, in Mark's Gospel, the confession of Jesus at the end of the centurion is truly this is the Son of God, brings us back to the beginning. It is in the crucifixion that he sees the power of God's work, that this is the work of love that is crucified because it is love. And the resurrection is not something, an appendage to this. The resurrection is the truth of that crucified love. That when we accompany those children, refugee children, in whose eyes we see the whole of humanity, here we are living the gospel, even if it's hoping against hope. We can never afford the luxury of despair. And so it's critical that we share the wisdom, the best practices, and that we're doing that in our group discussions today. But we can never despair. We have to live that gospel of hope today in our hearing.
Thank you so much, Father Bill. And as we wrap up, I just want to say, the question of how do we do this? What are actionable items that we can do? I believe that before Francis was speaking and also Malone was speaking, the call to action is very clear. And I believe that Pope Francis was one of the first, if not the first Pope, to really take that step forward in making each and every one of us uncomfortable in our actions. If your action makes you comfortable, it is not really for the common good. It is only so that you can give yourself an altruistic pat on the back. But if we are all able to make ourselves just a tiny bit uncomfortable for that common good, to step out of our comfort zones and use our voices, our resources, our time, our effort, our dedication for the common good of all, we actually can do something. What does that look like? Well, tell me about your talents. We return to the parable of the talents. What was the mistake? That the person who was given just one talent went and hid it. So do not hide your talents, whatever that may be. Are you a good communicator? Are you an educator? Do you have a good platform where you can speak to many people? These are the action items. When you speak, there is always risk. Are we willing to take the risk to see that inequality cease? Now, are we willing to plant the seeds and not be married to the idea of watching a whole forest grow within our lifetime? Sometimes those seeds, as we say in indigenous traditional knowledge in Colombia, is that we plant the seeds and years later we will see that grow. My grandmother waited 82 years to see justice in Colombia. And from the 4 years of age when she saw the civil war broke out that ravaged our nation for 70 years and going, she waited for the first democratically elected president. And it was only possible when she was 82 years old. And she told me, I wasn't married to the idea of seeing change, but I was married to the idea of planting the necessary seeds. And I believe that CST backs this in a very beautiful way. And Pope Francis showed us that this is possible in those 12 years that he gave us. So I really invite each and every one of you to put that into action in whatever contest that may look like for you. Also acknowledging our humanity and the difficulties, but also acknowledging the power and the collectiveness, which Mother Teresa highlights for us, that every drop of water makes the ocean, not the other way around. And so we have this momentum that we can really harvest. And so I'll turn it over to Father Bill for some
Well,
closing remarks.
Just again to thank you all, so many involved, and the wisdom you have. Daniel, you've just recurred to the words at the end of the first prayer that we began with Pope Leo, that we must be made restless by history. And that's the restlessness that Augustine speaks of, I think, until we rest in God alone. And to let the suffering and passion of our world be the place from which we began, as it was for Jesus. How in our lives do we bear faithful witness today in the hearing of the world, and never afford the luxury of despair? I come back to and see, for instance, the mothers in South Sudan, children with disability, and they've suffered far more than I ever will, but they have not despaired. So how can I despair when I look at the great numbers and the suffering? No, I think we begin by recognizing that each life, infinitely precious before God, is worth living for, even worth dying for. And that is what we're called to in our own lives, I think, to bear prophetic witness, but really to be able, in solidarity with those whom the world has forgotten, to be able to allow the gospel to take flesh. So just a word of thanks to you all, and critical that we pray to one another, because our hope is based on really a deep belief that the resurrection is at the heart of the crucifixion that we see lived out daily among so many. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Father Bill, for joining us and for being here with us. Just a quick thank you. We look forward to continuing this journey of Teaching Tuesdays with each and every one of you. A special thank you to the Justice and Peace and Integral Committee of the UISG, the Union of International Superior Generals. Here, the Secretariat, our communications team, spearheaded by Milton Raj, who creates all the beautiful content that you see week in and week out. Father Eric Villandria, as well as Father Roberto Jaramillo, who joined us earlier, and the wonderful team of the Pontifical Gregorian University here in Rome that helps us to revise Father Kramer's beautiful work of CST brought to you every single time. And of course, a lot of the faces that you have seen, all of our collaborators, and a very special thank you to Father Bill once again for joining us and giving us his time at 4 a.m. local time. We are extremely grateful. We want to lastly invite you to stay in touch with us. The next issue of our Promotio Iustatiae 138 will take a deep dive into the evolving Jesuit mission and its core commitment to justice and reconciliation through the lens of recent general congregations. And to subscribe to receive this and also the headlines of the Social Justice and Ecology Secretariat of the Society of Jesus, you can go to our website, sjesjesuits.global/subscribe, and we will be able to send this to you. We really hope that you can subscribe to our news and everything that we share on a weekly basis. And we thank you all, and we hope to see you next time. Wishing you all a blessed evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you may be.
Thank you all, and a very special
Thank you very
word.
much.
Thanks to Daniela. God bless you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniela
Peace to all.
Thank you.
and the Father for the presentation,
Thank you.
and everyone whose
Thank you,
contribution.
Father William, for the
Thank you.
input that you gave us, making us
Yes,
aware
it
of
was wonderful. Thank you very much.
all the inputs that you gave us. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Father William.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Father
Thank you
Bill.
all. Good. Thank you. God bless.
Bye.
Thank you.